And the next panel is on digital transformation of informal education. And it actually follows on very, very well from what we have just heard, because it turns out that the learning experiences that occur outside of formal educational settings, whether it's the university or, for example, vocational training, that those experiences can be particularly meaningful for people from countries and cultures where resources, technology, money, and so on are limited. So our last panel will now focus on informal education, and we have an outstanding group that will be chaired by the Deputy Director of the Post-Secondary Success Team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Suzanne Walsh, who was also the author of that second question that was discussed up there. And she will be taking your questions as well by Pigeonhole, so please pose them. And we've got our wonderful embedded microphones also for use during this session. To get us started, please welcome the CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and executive publisher of the journal Science, as well as its associated publications, Rush Holt. And Rush, there you are. Welcome. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning. I must say I'm really tempted to yield all of my time to Amy and Judith to continue. They are most interesting and most expert. I'm here on the program of experts in a slightly uncomfortable position because many of you are more expert in this subject than I. Although in my previous career, before I was at the American Association, now at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and after I had been a physics teacher and researcher, I was in the US Congress, where every day, many times, I was called on to appear as an expert on things about which I had only superficial knowledge. So as we talk about this subject today, expect my answers to be simplistic, and actually I will give you more questions than answers as we go along. It's not entirely inappropriate that I be here. AAAS, an international organization, in fact, the world's largest general science membership organization, has for many years had the mission to improve communication among scientists and between scientists and the public, and to advance education in science, engineering, and technology. In fact, AAAS several decades ago helped launch what became the International Science Education Reform Movement. And AAAS has had digital offerings to bring scientific research to the undergraduate classroom, for example, and to provide digital materials through a program called Science Net Links to teachers and families, including informal education. Since 1997, in fact, we started Science Net Links just a year before Bryn and Paige had their small startup, which you know as Google. We're talking today about, and I should say, I will tend to focus on science and engineering and related ideas. That's partly my background, my current job, but also because I think that is important to informal learning. And in light of the talk we just heard, I must point out that I cannot avoid a US orientation in my remarks. We're talking about informal education, which could mean nearly anything outside of a formal curriculum. It is as big as the world. In fact, it goes beyond the world. And so the potential is, in a sense, infinite. This so-called learning by choice, which might be a way we would describe informal learning has perhaps a fuzzy definition, but it's not meaningless. I think we can have some idea, we can develop some idea of what we're talking about here. It may include lifelong learning if by lifelong learning you don't mean just workplace training and education. It certainly can mean museum-based learning or YouTube-based learning. It can mean so many things. Much of this has not been studied thoroughly. There certainly have been some studies of after-school programs, some studies of museum-based learning. But there is a lot of room for conjecture here. When I say I'll be focusing on science, one reason is that according to the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, 70% of what is recognized as out-of-school learning involves science. It is certainly clear that STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, learning has changed really enormously in the last 15 years. This learning by choice used to involve television and museum visits and book reading and maybe collecting butterflies in the backyard. Now, with digital technology, entire collections of museums and tutorials on anything from YouTube and Khan Academy and so forth. Serious games exist where players can fight germs and learn about the immune system, or complete space missions, or try folding proteins. With virtual reality and augmented reality, you can take field trips to land and sea and in space, superimposing on what you see representations of what this looked like in geological eons past, or adding historical images or maps. Now there are more opportunities for amateur astronomy and computer data collected and analyzed hundreds or thousands of times faster by an individual. Studies can take part as part of citizen science, which is a combination of both individual work and collective and collaborative activity. There's no question for many of us that out-of-school learning is important. Studies are not definitive, but they do suggest that out-of-school programs can contribute to understanding and interest in established fields. Most of us, I think, would testify to that we can find something in our upbringing, in our education, where out-of-classroom experience lit a fire, solidified knowledge, expanded areas for further study. So there's a positive gain from informal activities, but it immediately raises the question of, are these gains available to people who already have educational advantages from school, who at home learned how to collect data or how to answer questions based on evidence? Does informal learning close or widen the gap between educationally privileged and educationally disadvantaged people? That is one of many questions that I want to raise with you today. Now, informal learning does not mean necessarily unguided or unstructured or directionless. It may be primarily curiosity-driven, but it can have focus and progression, and especially now with the digital possibilities, much more than a decade or two ago. Digital assistants can give informal learning direction and guidance if individuals are willing to take that direction and guidance. Informal learning may indeed be the best kind of learning because eventually the learner learns how to find a direction, to take a direction, to give a direction to the learning. Learning, perhaps with help, and today that would mean digital help, allows an individual to find order in serendipity. The learner learns how to learn. So, if informal learning can be effective, can it provide progress toward the desired aims of education and training? Yesterday, we heard several accounts of the aims of education. We heard Joya's definition that it is a way to develop productive citizens for a free society. Kathy Tianen said, deep learning leads to creativity, communication, citizenship, critical thinking, character, collaboration. We, of course, heard the somewhat circular formulation that learning is about learning to learn. We heard that companies want workers with literacy, responsibility, reliability, engagement, readiness, independence. Does informal learning help? We heard yesterday about the digital future of work, the digital future of higher education, the digital lifelong learning. We were reminded that digital technology should not be regarded as an end in itself, but rather as a means to an end. So let's ask, what is the end? What are the aims of education? And does digital informal learning achieve those ends along with formal learning, better than formal learning, instead of formal learning? Or in any case, let's ask the question, does digital enhancement of informal education maximize the achievement of those ends? Or how does digital enhancement get there? So where in the world do we find ourselves now intellectually? What is missing in our education right now? Well, experts have, to a large extent, been rejected in many places around the world. People don't want to be told that they should vaccinate their children. People don't want to be told by experts that it's okay to serve GMO foods to their families. People, at least in the United States, don't want to be told by experts that they must reduce their burning of carbon, or else people will die. They're rejecting the expertise. In fact, there's a book out recently called The Death of Expertise. But what do they substitute for expert findings? People are rejecting evidence, dismissing evidence, denying evidence, and substituting instead ideological tenets, wishful thinking, unfounded or loosely supported opinions. Opinion, evidence, yeah, they're about equivalent. We find that in personal lives and personal decisions and in governmental actions and policy making. A question that I frequently occurred when I was in public office and now that I'm in a science organization from students is, do you believe in climate change? Of course, the right answer is it's not a matter of belief, it's what does the evidence say? It should not be a matter of opinion how many people were attending an inauguration. Anyone who uses the phrase alternate truth in the way that it has been used in recent months and years should be laughed off the stage. So in this non-authoritarian world, do we need to empower people to handle evidence? Is one of the aims of education today, be it formal or informal, to develop an appreciation of evidence, an ability and a determination to use evidence in our lives? I think so. Is informal education better at accomplishing that? A case can be made that structured education, by nature, by its essence, somewhat authoritarian, in other words, someone constructed that structure based on expertise, can that develop in the learner a true appreciation of evidence for evidence sake, rather than because it has been asserted or presented? If a goal of learning is learning to learn, then is the love of learning an aim of education? And is that achieved better informally than because of required attendance and a truant officer? How can informal opportunities be used to close the gap in achievement between privileged and less privileged? Can we make informal learning equally accessible to diverse populations? And beyond the accessibility itself, can we help diverse populations use the digitally enhanced learning techniques? Can one learn in any significant and lasting way without challenges, tests, and assessments, which are often missing in informal learning? Or, if tests are necessary, how can we make them available, make them used in an informal setting? How can overburdened and over-specialized school teachers provide guidance for general out-of-school learning? And conversely, how can out-of-school learning relate to the school standards or curricula? We heard yesterday that smartphones can be used in structured learning and in the process lead to greater collaboration, particularly among families. So how does informal learning lead to more collaborative investigation? Informal opportunities increase, perhaps, social and educational inequities. How do we minimize that? So the potential for informal learning may be infinite. Yet, when we want to explore today the digital aspects of informal learning, this morning we are here in a formal setting in a formal organization, listening to formal lectures. So, not to prolong this irony, I'll stop.
Thank you. I think I was given the informal part because I'm maybe not so formal, so we'll see if we can continue the formal format. I'm Suzanne Walsh from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and a member of the Global Learning Council. I'd like to invite up our panelists for today, and because of the weather, I'm not even sure who's here. So if you're on this panel, oh, thank you. I know Barbara may come flying in, screeching in from the airport. So I'm going to call people's names. We will get formal. Florian, I see. Did somebody just clap for you? Oh. Okay. Ooh. Pierre. You can clap for Pierre as well. All right, who am I missing? Thomas, this is like a game show now. Come on down. Oh my gosh. I don't know how I get these crazy assignments. Anyway, thank you. Just get to know each other. Thank you all so much for being here for the informal learning discussion and for those incredibly provocative questions, Rush. I think that those really are some of the most central questions that we have to ask about informal learning. And the fact that we struggle with trying to figure out how to be informal ourselves is quite a challenge. What I'd like to do is I'm going to introduce each member of the panel, and by that I mean I'm going to say their name and their title and their organization very quickly. We're going to see how my pronunciation is for each. And then I'm going to ask them for a quick I'm going to ask you about your own informal learning quickly, and then we will talk about each of their organizations and the kind of work that they represent in this space. We've met Rush and Florian Rumpelt. Was that right? Perfect. Rumpelt? Okay. Kyron or Kieran, you can choose your pronunciation. Open Higher Education. He is the Director of Education there. Then we have Pierre Dillenburg from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. We have Thomas Schmidt, Hollywood? Oh, look at me, Hollywood Media. Oh, look at me. My German is outstanding today. Hollywood Media and Education, he's the CEO. And to just get us started in thinking in an informal way, in what way has each of you used digital learning in your own informal learning? Have you used digital for your own informal learning? I can't see everyone. I'm going to start with you. Florian.
I think there's a perfect connection to what we just heard in this incredibly inspiring talk from the two researchers just beforehand. And before I joined Kyron, I was a research assistant myself in teacher education with a focus on the internationalization of teacher education and diversity pedagogy. And I worked in Namibia, and I guess the Himba people you introduced with this really nice color example were either from Namibia or Angola. And I worked in Namibia with another indigenous group of the San people. And I had incredible informal learning experiences with people who had such a connection, such a knowledge to the environment that we faced there. But I had communication problems sometimes. I learned Afrikaans quite quickly, but the major language they spoke was a click language, which is not that easy to learn yourself. So I had my phone with me all the time, and I had, even in the Namibian bush, internet connection 5 years ago already. And so we would communicate in an incredibly enthusiastic, passionate way using pictures that I was Googling on the phone when they tried to explain some of the knowledge they have to me. And I think that really changed my life, being able to overcome communication barriers through digital possibilities and devices that help me better communicate with people.
Thomas?
Yeah, for me and for my organization, the new digital things are absolutely important because without this, I cannot develop all this project with my team. This is not possible, and a lot of partner in my team never learn all these things I need now. I have now very, very nice women in my team, and they learn computer science. And this is so funny then to go in a classroom and see, wow, that's great. You learned in half year ago the basic of computer science, and now you are in a classroom. But also the digital transformation absolutely changed my communication. I talk with my partners, with Microsoft guys and so with Skype. And Thursday evening, I talk via Twitter in a teacher chat, it's a @chat.de, and we talk 1 hour about all these educational things. And then I come back and I must write an email, but what is email? Email is an old communication thing. And so in the next level, I must chat with my son and so. And I think the digital transformation is a big, big chance for informal learning.
Pierre?
So one type of informal learning is learning to be a father. And for that, Facebook is a great tool because you see the facet of your teenager that you never see. No, teenagers have 2 facets, one at home, one outside, and suddenly you can see them from outside. But from a professional point of view, the main digital tool for learning is email. Our cognition is social. My cognition has been shaped by 20,000 emails per year with colleagues, and that's what, we operate on a physical hardware. The hardware is personal and physical, but the software over there is social, it's based on language, and this language is acquired through thousands of email over years. So email is the main informal learning thing for me.
You're laughing about the email was not the first thing that I would have thought of. So what I'd like to do now is just have each of you reflect on in what way your organization uses or promotes tech-enabled learning in informal education. Look at this panel is getting back. More people want to come and join us. Barbara, come up here. No, this is great. Anyone else want to join the panel? Any other thoughts? Just come on up. Okay, did you hear the question before? Okay, well, we'll catch you right up. Don't even worry about it. Everyone, this is Barbara, you've heard. Barbara Moser-Mercer is from the University of Geneva, where she is the director of Inzone. And she just got off a plane. So we will give you 1 moment to just relax. And what I was asking each person to reflect on, I'll come to you last, is in what ways your organization uses tech-enabled learning in an informal way. And I'll start with Pierre this time.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, yes, sorry. In what way does your organization use tech-enabled learning for informal education?
So the main answer is MOOCs. In our case,
And you have to tell a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, kind of Swiss MIT based in Lausanne. We decided to run for MOOCs. From the beginning, we produced 75 MOOCs, 1.7 million registration. We are a small university in a small country, but still 1.7 million students worldwide, especially 500,000 Americans who registered to a MOOC from Lausanne. They don't know Lausanne, they don't know Switzerland even. When you tell an American that you are Swiss, they say, I love Stockholm, because they're still confused. Anyway, but are MOOCs formal or informal? Is MOOC an informal learning medium? I mean, a MOOC, you take a course, a formal course. you cut it in bits, but it's still a formal course from EPFL, from Stanford. You cut it in bits. You have assignments. Is that formal and informal? And I think the nice thing about MOOCs is that it blurred the divide between formal and informal. They were designed as formal. You just take a course and you format it, and they became informal. And the main reason is we have no control. We put something online, and then we have absolutely no control of who takes it and so on. One anecdote is this Japanese guy who took a MOOC of physics in French to learn French, not to learn physics. So we do not control. So for me, my lesson about that is that more and more technologies blur this academic distinction that we make between formal and informal. Some people care about degrees, some people don't care, so this concept is blurred by technologies.
And just on the last panel or discussion that we heard from Carnegie Mellon, do you think that any of the MOOCs need to be adjusted for cross-cultural? I mean, this Japanese gentleman who is taking physics to learn French, I'm not sure whether it needed to be adjusted, but...
Absolutely not. No, so in our MOOC strategy, we especially target French-speaking Africa, so the French-speaking sub-Saharan Africa. And Switzerland has a nice thing, we never had colonies. So when we do MOOCs for French-speaking Africa, we cannot be accused of being neo-colonialist. I mean, it's easier to be Swiss in Africa than to be French or Belgium. And that's a nice thing. But here is the lesson. So half of our MOOCs are in English, subtitled in French, half are in French, subtitled in English. The MOOCs in English, subtitled in French, are not taken in the French-speaking sub-Saharan Africa. The ratio is very low. Subtitles do not work at all. We are not even at the cultural adaptation. No, it's even just the language. And one explanation is that our MOOCs are not funny. There are mathematics everywhere. You know, it's kind of every slide is full of mathematics. You cannot read the formula and the subtitle. If you have a MOOC on philosophy, maybe you can have time to read the subtitles, but not a MOOC full of mathematics. So even before the cultural adaptation, just subtitling is over, but now dubbing is getting much cheaper than before. So dubbing is the future, not subtitle.
Right, thank you. Thomas, in what way well, first tell us a little bit about Hollywood, and then talk about how you use tech-enabled learning in an informal way.
I think all our projects enable media. This is our name, Media and Education, and we will bring media and education together. And we developed a lot of projects for children, and children are highly motivated if they can use media. And so we can use this for our learning settings. And we are not a school book company. We developed informal learning settings together with Deutsche Telekom or Microsoft and so. And everything what we do is free for everyone. And it is not only free for using, sondern it is also free when I can use this. And this is also, nobody needs this often. Maybe every girl or every boy need computer science, maybe. But this is not the importance of our projects. And so we implement every project in media field. We develop special learning areas. We develop Eportfolios. This is very, very interesting, that we can build scenarios that they are more individually, because a classical e-learning system is not, you have a course and you have often a special group. And I think this is not so important that you are in a learning group. I think it's better you have a personal learning environment, and then you can say, okay, this is my group or this is not my group. And this is what we do.
Are you disagreeing with him, Pierre?
Yes.
Yes. What do you disagree with already? And we've only just started.
Can we start fighting now?
Wait, of course.
Individual adaptation was the leitmotif from computer-based education from the beginning. And in the 80s, and you have seen the picture from Amy in Chile, but in the 80s, we often put 2 kids per computer because there were more kids than computers. So if you think about individual adaptation, you cannot adapt individually to 2 kids. And when we did experiment with 2 kids per computer, they learn more. Because when you are facing a computer together, you have to discuss, to argue, to justify, to reformulate, and so on. So individual adaptation is fine. I have nothing against it. But it's always a balance between individual adaptation and social interaction. If the need for individual adaptation leads to having kids learning alone, then it will be dramatic. We need always to try to have both. Social interaction is a key in learning, and some adaptation is fine as well. So balance, not everything on one side.
Yeah, this is the same what I think. You need a social interaction. This is absolutely important. But it is also important that you have your personal collection of all these learning things and so on and so on. This is what I mean.
And Thomas, you mentioned the importance of e-portfolios. And yesterday we heard from some employers, major companies, and it seems like portfolios are increasingly really critical if you're looking for a job, to have a portfolio, not just a traditional resume. Can you talk about why, for you, e-portfolios are so important for informal learning?
If you would like to know a little bit more about your competencies, I think a portfolio is necessary, because you have not so a lot of ways to find out in which things are good or not good. And so I think e-portfolio is a big chance in this field. And so we build e-portfolios, and in this e-portfolios you can find out in which things I am good or not good. And then you can use this also to find maybe the right job and so and so. But it is not a good way for a company to bring an e-portfolio to his customers and then say, okay, you must do this e-portfolio, and later we can change, okay, you are good only in these things, and so you go to another job. This is not what I mean. This is for myself or for myself. So. And so I think this is very interesting to use e-portfolio in this field. But in the field of computer science, we don't need e-portfolios, because there is the social interaction absolutely important. And so we build other informal settings for the children.
Well, and I think the thing that's interesting about e-portfolios is, to Rush's questions that he was challenging us, how do you learning to learn, but how do you prove that you've learned something? The thing about informal learning is you don't have grades, you don't have a transcript, and so if there is a way of capturing and showing or demonstrating the competencies, that's really important. Pierre, and then I'm going to go back to Florian.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, quite often we confuse informal learning with accumulating experience. You can have a lot of experience and learning nothing. You can repeat the same mistake again and again. At some point, learning means that you turn experience into knowledge or into learning if you reflect on it. And this reflection is not spontaneous. We are not very good at reflecting. So building a portfolio is a nice reflective activities. And quite often, that's the part that can be brought to schools. In school, you can discuss more. I mean, you need kind of external pressure to reflect, spontaneously or whine. External pressure or whine, that triggers reflection. You know, at some point you can accumulate experience.
External pressure or whine? I just want to make sure I understood that.
Yes,
External pressure or whine.
Whine, you say, okay,
reflection.
It's the 5th time that I do the same mistake, and suddenly after a glass of wine say, okay, maybe there is a pattern there, but if you take the German system for vocational education, the Swiss or German dual system, kids or apprentices acquire experience at the workplace, they don't learn. Then they go to the school, and at school they have to turn this experience into knowledge. That's the role of the school. And again, it's a jumping between informal and formal. Informal learning, you acquire experience, but sometimes it takes a bit of formal or authority or technology to push you to reflect and to turn experience into knowledge.
Florian, are you ready to get into all of this?
Too much to talk about already.
First, talk a little bit about your organization and how you use tech-enabled learning.
Yeah, Karen Open Higher Education has the mission of enabling access to higher education and successful learning through digital solutions. So obviously, we should make use of digitization if we want to follow our mission. The very basic idea of Karen was that our founders, as well as the very early first followers like me, we came from very diverse backgrounds, but in all these backgrounds, we got to know refugees who were not able to access higher education for different reasons. And I was working at the University of Passau, which was sometimes called the German Lampedusa, because there were so many refugees coming through that town. But these refugees had not only, they didn't only come in 2015 when everyone was talking about these mass migration, all that thing that wording I don't really like. For 5 years before, we had already worked on initiatives for refugees and for the integration of refugees into higher education. And I made very close friends there who, after 3 years, still were sitting in their camps, and for several reasons, mostly language and documentation, were not able to enter a normal, more formalized system. I do not think, and we had that discussion already in the email exchange before, I do not think we do informal learning, because the definition of the balance between formal, non-formal, informal learning would say that there is no quality assurance, for example, in informal learning, and I'm a quality assurance enthusiast, so we do something in between, but we try to, in collaboration with those more formalized institutions, find solutions to make access better and more effective and reach more people. And this is why we looked out there. We had that already in the last days. So what is actually available there? And there are MOOCs available out there in high quality also. There are MOOCs available in very low quality. You need to really carefully select what open educational resources, what educational resources in general you use. And we said, we can make higher education accessible through a digital platform that we programmed fully ourselves because it's more agile then. And we want universities, we provide a service actually by giving perspectives, opportunities to refugees they cannot cater at a given point. And we expect, and there also topics like portfolio come in, that the skills, the competencies, the knowledge students acquire while studying with MOOCs gets recognized as part of recognition of prior learning. And so we collaborate with a lot of more than 40 universities worldwide, with whom we're working on the recognition of MOOC-based education and several study tracks in order to fill the waiting time many highly capable refugees are facing with knowledge, with competencies, with learning, with goals, and with the perspective of this actually being part of the formal degree program they later on study at a regular university.
And with those MOOCs, because you are a quality assurance enthusiast, do you also see, I'm going to ask the same question that I asked of Pierre, do you see that you have to make any kinds of cross-cultural adjustments, and could you talk a little bit about how you think about that?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to say we don't produce MOOCs ourselves. We have our own MOOC platform that went live just this week. Have a look at Karen X, it's on edX. And Fachhochschule Lübeck, University of Applied Science. The MOOC producer is somewhere here, and so they are all here. They produce a MOOC that is on our platform. But our basic idea is we use criteria of the European higher education area to cluster MOOCs available out there. And then we frame that with an approach that best caters the needs of our students. I wouldn't call that cross-cultural learning. What we follow, the approach is more diversity-oriented learning, especially with our students from the MENA region. We are facing a lot of challenges regarding gender. For example, we provide tutorials. It's key of our pedagogy that the MOOC-based learning is supplemented by tutorials. And at the beginning, we just had tutorials like on a topic base. And then when female students would enter the tutorial, as soon as a male student would come, they would switch off the video camera, which has, for some students, a significant impact on the way they collaborate in a virtual classroom. So yeah, we're continuously working on that. I'm really looking forward to discussing and further talking with you after this. There are so many touch points. And for example, we've started collaboration with the Open University. I think who really is a best practice example of trying to overcome the north-south barrier. For example, they have the University of Cape Town being one of the major producers of MOOCs there. And we're trying to set up tutorials, trainings for volunteers who, for example, do tutorials for us in diverse virtual classrooms. And it is important to continuously develop on such approaches. It's a very long, a very difficult and painful task, but you can't be successful, you can't be effective, especially in virtual learning environments if you don't take all the dimensions of diversity into account.
Great, thank you. Barbara. Hello. So could you talk a little bit about the work that you do with Inzone, how you use tech-enabled learning? And do you consider, I think the question is also now, and do you think it's informal? Now that we've heard about 16 definitions of informal, do you think that it's informal learning?
Well, thanks, and apologies really to everyone that I'm late. It's not the Swiss way, but
it's totally fine for me.
I don't travel on a Swiss passport. Maybe that's a good excuse. I think maybe the best way for me to cover the range from what we consider formal all the way down to informal is just to give you a glimpse of what we do and how we do it. So Inzone is actually a center at the University of Geneva, an academic center devoted to research and obviously also humanitarian action. We work in some of the world's largest refugee camps, mostly in the Horn of Africa, in Kakuma and Dadaab. We work in Jordan, in Azraq refugee camp, but we also work partially in host communities, such as Amman. We're branching out into Azraq host community. We've branched out into Dadaab host community. But our focus is really on camps, on large camps, and on developing higher education spaces. We don't really consider ourselves as a center that rolls out courses. We look at the whole ecosystem of a camp, and we try and figure out what can higher education bring to a refugee camp. And that kind of reflection really has led us to designing the whole ecosystem. So we obviously are keen on offering higher education opportunities to refugees who have the necessary credentials. And we are flexible to some extent on those credentials. It's particularly dicey in the Middle East right now. It's a little less difficult in Kenya because of protracted displacement, people have the equivalent of a high school leaving diploma in the camp and have acquired it and are thus able, to access higher education. So we then partner up either with faculties in our own university, the law faculty, the theology faculty, the psychology faculty. We look at MOOCs that were prepared by our university and are on offer, that have already been integrated as learning materials in courses offered to undergraduates already. And then we work with faculty to develop a whole round the MOOC, but looking at the MOOC only as learning material. But we also leave the MOOC as course open to the extent that we want to make sure that every learner who enters the course on one end will be able to leave either with an official ECTS certificate, meaning proof that that person has indeed reached a certain level of knowledge acquisition and skill acquisition according to the ECTS format, or if that is not the case, giving the option of what is a traditional certificate on the platform with the option of coming back and taking the exams again. Our professors come to the camps. They go and we run seminars. So really the MOOC is a learning material around which we build a course. An extension of that is actually working with other universities. I think an interesting example that I would like to share with you is a course that took us about a year to redesign, and it's Princeton's Global History Lab. which we rolled out last September with undergraduates at Princeton, with undergraduates at the University of Geneva, with refugee learners in Kakuma refugee camp, and refugee learners in Azraq, and refugee learners in Amman. It was a truly global course, but it took us a year to redesign the course, not only to make it bilingual, but also to make it relevant. So the whole course, all the case studies were re-scripted to focus on forced migration and statelessness. And the learning products, the outcomes, were really joint products between Princeton and Geneva and refugee learners in the different settings. And the final exam was bilingual. Learners were allowed to answer the exam questions in the end, either in Arabic or in English. There had to be a minimum percentage in English. But this, to us, is really a way of opening up refugee camps to the world. I think our rector always asks, well, what does this do to students at the University of Geneva? What is the benefit for them? And I think here there is no more question. Learners at the home university benefit as much from this interaction, because when in the world do you get to learn side by side with a refugee learner who lives in a very, very different context? So that's the formal and maybe the non-formal. Now, moving into the informal, what does this ecosystem look like in a camp? So the ecosystem is really learning hubs that by now in some camps where we manage, for legal reasons, where we can manage, where we empower refugees, those who have taken our courses, to actually run our operations in the camp. So we actually go from information access to knowledge building, knowledge construction, to skill acquisition, and to the actual application of those skills in the way of livelihoods. And as you can imagine, there are very few livelihoods for refugees in camps. There are very few livelihoods for urban refugees, and I don't really want to go into the work permit issues in the Middle East. So one would tend to ask, well, why higher education for refugees in camps? You know, where is that leading to? We try not to really focus on the utilitarian approach to higher education. Yes, that's a way to go, but questioning the relevance of acquiring thinking skills for any human being, I think, is not really part of the humanitarian ecosystem, so we don't really go there. But we do work very closely with the International Labour Organization. We follow very closely how the labor market, how that system evolves, and how those opportunities of access increase. Now, going to the informal, our empowered refugee learners in camps also take their learning to the community. Not only do we have student cafes that we support with microcredits, where all the discussions have to take place. So in Kakuma, for example, if ever you make it up there, there is an Ethiopian refugee cafe for our students and for the community, and I can tell you the coffee is outstanding. Roasted in the back of the shelter, hand roasted, batch roasted, for those of you who are coffee aficionados. So a little bit of PR for the businesses that we support in the camp. But the very informal part really is taken to the community. We deliver a whole package of human rights courses into Kakuma, which are now becoming part of a bachelor's degree that we build with Kenyatta University in Kenya. So we always partner with a local university, and we develop joint degrees. I think that really relieves us of any kind of reproach for being culturally inappropriate, and all of our courses are bilingual to begin with, so I think we're navigating that system fairly carefully. The informal part really comes in through a whole applied arts program. So we have applied arts training. We have practitioners who are our learners and graduates, who then take the learning in a very informal way, and this is where I come to the informal, in a very informal way into the community. So we visit primary schools, secondary schools. Yes, we take, the mobile phones with us, and they can see, what's happening on WhatsApp, or, what's happening on those platforms. So yes, it is technology mediated, but I think really the last part of that last mile is perhaps less technology intensive than until we reach the camp. But even that mile, I can assure you, anyone who's ever told you that everyone has access, no. If you've ever tried connectivity in a refugee camp, you will walk away thinking low technology, low resource, what can I do and how can the human element interact with the technology to deliver what we want to deliver. So maybe I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, great. Well, and yesterday we heard a comment, and now I can't remember who said it, but somebody talked about the way that employability, I think, is understood in the German education context. It wasn't people being ready for a specific job, but it was people who were job enabled. And I think that that's such an interesting kind of language, because I think that it gets at your point. It's not that I will go, I will receive some sort of educational experience, and therefore I will get exactly a job in that refugee context. But perhaps when I leave, I am now job enabled, which I think is just a really interesting sort of way of thinking about the world. I would like to put up our pigeonhole questions. I don't know who's. Oh, okay. I see a lot of pointing happening. And so I'm going to go by the number of votes, and you can also see them down in front of you if you'd like. We have many informal learners without papers or recognition. What can we do to have informal learning be more formally recognized and education to be a more effective tool for global social mobility? We're just going to start with something light from the audience. So after that, we'll do world peace, and then climate change. Who would like, I feel like Pierre, I'm sure, has ideas, but who is, you have a reputation. Anyone ready, or do you need time to think?
No, there are many local initiatives to recognize informal education. I don't have a global answer. At some point, I thought if you want to have a formal recognition of informal learning, it's a bit like alcohol-free wine. You know, at some point, I mean, why do we? I'm not sure that's the best way to try to benefit from informal education.
Rush something.
Some efforts to provide credit for lifelong experience results in the individual detecting a direction, a sense of progress in what she or he has done, which is, of course, I think what Pierre was talking about when you try to turn experience into learning. What you're doing is detecting a direction, a sense of progress, a building, and it is sometimes possible to take disorganized life experience and detect, assign, determine a direction that is very much as valuable as a curriculum, which is an authoritarian imposed direction.
Florian?
Okay, there are so many dimensions in that question. Let me try the first one, recognition. I think there, next to higher education accreditation, my other hobby when I still had time was being a youth trainer in the European Union Erasmus programs. And there were a lot of trials on the recognition of there we call it non-formal learning with informal programs. I think key are new solutions to assessment. I don't really like the word assessment, but to recognition of competencies you acquire. And I do believe that things like portfolios can really help. And I mean, there needs to be, and there will be even more in the future, the discussion what actually is the formal part of the education. Is it actually measuring the outcome, or does everything on the way to achieve a certain learning outcome need to be that formal? I don't believe it needs to be, but I still believe that higher education institutions, for example, do have a strong ownership of knowledge. And this is why I think where we really have to improve, we have to make it possible that better informal, non-formal, and formal owners of knowledge competencies, enablers in education, work together. And then we see who in the very end provides the formal degree, or if we even need the formal degree. looking at the great input yesterday from the students' workshop who wanted to totally overcome that. And I think we're like light years ahead of what partially we are discussing here. I still believe in informal degrees, I have to admit, coming along with that. Social global mobility, I think that really is a good question. And I think working with refugees globally, there's a high potential. The potential is the following. In Germany, and I think it's different in other countries, we have huge dropout rates with international students, even higher in many study tracks than with German students. So why do we not use digitally enhanced or even digital learning for students to, in a more informal way, prove what they're capable of, and then allowing them mobility, social mobility, and actual mobility, coming, for example, from Jordan to Germany to a technical university, just because they have proved through different ways of learning that you could already hear here. They have studied maybe with Inzone, or they have studied with Chiron. And then we say, one of the perspectives we can provide is actually global social mobility based on the informal and non-formal learning that you went through.
Barbara?
I'd like to use an example from where Inzone came from. So we started out over 10 years ago with the realization that humanitarian communication was not working in the field because it was an English-only festival. So it was English the language of power, and all other languages were certainly not languages of power. And we felt that, no, that's not how you can implement human rights. That's not how you can implement international humanitarian law. So the next step was we need to do something about it. We need to train humanitarian interpreters, because not everyone is going to learn the other language. So the interpreting, that's where we came from. And that's where we really, really learned our ways out in the field in conflict zones. But that really has stuck. And what we are doing today is, because of the scale of the language communication problem in the refugee context. When I was out in Greece training last summer, I mean, I had never, ever, seen, language combinations that, I knew Greek into Sorani Kurdish, or, Arabic into, Dari, and it was unbelievable. So it was very clear to me that with the scale of the crisis, there had to be a scalable solution. Now, scalable solutions, and maybe Pierre will disagree with me, but good pedagogy does not scale easily. You really have to look at it very, very carefully and drill down to how it's really implemented in the field. So what we've now done is we've developed self-learning, e-learning modules that are about an hour long. We've developed a whole learning pathway. We've actually developed 3 learning pathways with increasing levels of expertise in humanitarian interpreting. And they're all self-learning. There is no certificate in the end. There is nothing in the end. But if you then come to us and you want to take that advanced degree, and you can prove that you've acquired those skills, then we'll recognize them. And I'll hand carry your file to the admissions office and say, yes, here's all the modules they've taken from Inzone, and they really have that level. But if they don't want to do that, and they get a job elsewhere, that's fine too. And 2 examples of that, yes, we've had quite a few who've done this already and who have their jobs, but we've also those who've really aspired to the higher degree and got resettled. And one of our learners who got resettled just recently, 3 weeks ago, landed in Minnesota and had a job the next day. So I think there are ways in which we can use informal learning where we can think about, but I do believe it's easier when it's a very well-defined skill and competency. I think if it's more nebulous, if you just take all of the 21st century skills, I think it would be very difficult.
Well, and Thomas, can you talk about what the role of media is in informal learning? Because it seems like everybody has a way of sort of taking, like I'm going to use a MOOC or I'm going to use something else to help provide the content. How do you see media playing a role in informal learning?
Let's talk a little bit about the project, what we initiated 2 years ago. The idea was to bring German students together with students in Africa. and to do something about the problem with nutrition and hunger in Africa. The program is called Students for Kids, and we start this with the Asthma Foundation of Prevention, and the FAZ is one of the largest newspapers in Germany. And what we think is, okay, in the mind of the German students are so a lot of things, and can we use this and connect this with other students in Zambia, maybe? And so we start this voluntary program. In the first step, we develop only ideas, and then we prove these ideas and come back and make a big summit, and all the ideas were represented, and then we awarded the best ideas. And in this process, we connect the German students via media, via new media, with the students in Zambia. And they must work together. And at the end of this process, we find out two very interesting projects. One, a group from students in Germany, in Mexico, and also in Zambia, plant a specific plant, the so-called fast banana. This is a special plant, and in this plant a lot of nutrients. And so if you bring this fast banana to Zambia, you can help to lose the problem with nutrition. And in this year, the first plants are being to Zambia and so. And the other project was also very interesting. This was only from German students. They plan to build a special fish farm in plastic buckets. And this fish farm is very, very cheap. You need only $5,000 for one farm. And this can also help. You can put it in Zambia to a village, and it's very, very easy. You put small fishes inside, and you must wait for a half year, and then you have your first fishes to eat. And this is also a very interesting thing. And these projects are possible via new media, and the students in Zambia and the persons in Zambia and the students in Germany work together. And I think this is one interesting example for the possibilities of new media. And this is free. This is a voluntary program. Nobody must learn this. This is only a program for experts in engagement. And this is what we do.
It seems like some aspects of informal learning have a lot of volunteer component. I think each of you have talked about the role of volunteers. And so Rush sort of had challenged us about experts and what's the role of experts in learning. What's the role of volunteers in informal learning? Can you do informal learning without volunteers?
This is absolutely necessary, I think so. Per example, we make very interesting things in the field of computer science, but it is not possible to find a lot of teachers. And so we need volunteers to help children to understand computer science and to generate very interesting workshops. You can see one thing there. This is a Roberta initiative. This is the same what we do with Code Your Life. And I think we need parents. We need grandpas and mams, and we need so a lot of volunteers to bring all this to students. Maybe this is one thing.
Floor.
Again, I think there are several dimensions coming along with that. First of all, it depends on your definition of informal learning. A very extreme definition would be like it would only be volunteers that participate in informal learning because it's unintended. So even if I'm a member of a formal institution, the informal learning part is voluntarily. But the kind of learning we are talking here, I think you can do it without volunteers, but it costs an incredible amount of money. And at the very end, it's also about costs. And coming along with that, and that for me is the most interesting aspect, is you can actually convince volunteers, you can show volunteers how they can benefit from the informal learning coming along with their learning facilitation they do, and that is a key aspect of what we do. I mean, it's not enough. It was maybe at the beginning when we started, everyone was so, oh my God, there's this big crisis, I want to help, I want to do something, which is nice, and everyone did it for a positive, good reason. But in the end, I think it is good, it is appropriate to ask what actually comes out of it for me. And that is informal learning. So when you engage with others as a volunteer, and I mean, you said that with your initiative, but it's with so many initiatives, with everyone sitting here, when you engage, you are learning yourself and you can get something out of it, and we have to make that clear. And that is, I think, one of the biggest values that comes from volunteering and informal learning connected to it.
I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to be able to answer the question, because for me, the juxtaposition of volunteer versus experts is not a good one, because experts can very well be volunteers. So I just want to, emphasize that part. I think the volunteer, if the emphasis is on the volunteerism, I think it's good to reflect on, well, how does it fit into your learning ecosystem? And for us, it really fits very well. Because in the context that we work in, anyone who's ever accessed higher education will at some point be a teacher. I can guarantee you, whether that's in a formal setting or an informal setting, somewhere in the camp there is a need. And somewhere in that camp, the people who've had the privilege of accessing higher education will be asked to volunteer. Yes, there's the incentive work scheme that UNHCR has, and yes, you can make some money, and it's very, very little. But I think for us, what's most important is, for those who have been able to access higher education and have become reflective learners because of the way our pedagogical approach works, I think an excellent way for them is to continue to reflect on their own learning and pass it on. And I think that is really, to me at least, in terms of the expert approach. What is an expert? I've spent my life researching expertise, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details, including how your brain changes. But it really, it's fascinating. It really is fascinating how learners who are really very self-reflective and have become self-reflective learners can begin on the road to real expertise simply by teaching others. And they can volunteer for that, or they can be paid for it. The second option is probably a better one for many, but the first one is not the only one.
Okay, I'm going to give Pierre a chance to, it wasn't even me, someone else wanted you to answer this question. That you said that some people don't care, or wait, some people care about degrees and others don't. And yesterday we heard that companies care deeply about degrees when hiring people. So when and where does informal education enter?
The question is not people, but employers, okay? Why do you need a degree? Do you need a degree to get a job, or does the employer care not, or does not care about your job? My son is passing a job interview right now, and I think most of things he has learned after the end of his study. So I think it depends on the field. There are some fields where civil engineer, medical doctor, you still expect some degrees, but in the field of IT, and which means everything, more and more there will be people hired without a formal degree. The skills will matter more than... So but finally, why should we fight for a formal degree? If the employer can measure your skills in 15 minutes, he gives you a laptop, he say, if you learn Scala, do something with this laptop, you have 15 minutes, then we don't need a degree at all for that. We just need skills.
Anyone in the audience have a question? You know, we have this cool thing that we can throw. Oh, there's one in the back. I don't know that I can throw that far. Are you going to throw it for me? That was very exciting to be able to throw that. You have seen that? This is our microphone that we throw around. It's
Great.
Very exciting.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All the people who work for me who are doing coding, they all push their code into GitHub, and all our projects are on GitHub. And so I think for them, somehow their degrees are a little bit important to really prove that they see the big picture and have some formal education. But actually, if they go, what I fear they do go to a company and want to start there, we just have to send them their GitHub account, and then they can see what great projects they were contributing to. And this is much more valid than some master degree from even our university, I think.
Yes, if I can jump on that.
Please.
In data science, one way to recruit people is the Kaggle points. Kaggle is a place where you compete to solve machine learning challenges. And what I heard in the Silicon Valley is that the Kaggle points are more important than your Stanford degree if you want to get a job in data sciences.
Barbara?
And cheaper.
I just want to maybe take that question, the comment, in the direction of the SDGs. And with SDG 4, we've really, we're emphasizing the lifelong learning. And that really doesn't mean that every bit of learning has to have a degree or certification or assessment attached to it. Before I went to Afghanistan, I really had to study up on transitional justice. No, that wasn't my field. And no, I didn't get a degree for it, and I didn't get a certificate for it. But yes, it was recognized that when I arrived in Kabul that I knew enough about it to be able to enter that context and work there. So I think maybe moving away a little bit from all informal learning, or informal learning needs to lead to a degree, I don't think that sits well with the SDGs. At least not the way I read them.
Well, and I think what this question sort of is along those lines. Should we formalize and standardize the recognition with a form of degree or e-certificate of informal education to increase employability? It's the I think we keep coming back to this sort of question about, do we ever have to formalize the informal? I think it's a question that, did you want to answer that? I mean, you don't have, it's kind of existential, but if you would like to. Did you want to comment?
Well, we're spending a lot of time discussing using digital to communicate and facilitate the communication of the material. But digital can also be very valuable on the other side of assessing what one has accomplished, testing it, if indeed, as I raised the question earlier, if testing is necessary for a person to learn, and in an informal setting, the testing is hard to come by, through digital means, distributed techniques, it is possible to get that and get certification for accomplishment. I'm not sure that certification should be the end, but it is, if one needs it for certain employment or other things, this is a way to get it.
Oh, Patrick? I only know his name. I didn't know the other gentleman's name.
Nice throw. Barbara, you said earlier on that good pedagogy is not scalable. And I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that, and I also wanted to see whether everybody actually agrees with that.
I wrote that down because I wasn't sure I agreed with it.
Okay, so here's I'm going to have them vote. I'm going to have everyone vote. Thumb up or thumb down. Pedagogy is not scalable. Do you agree? Thumb up, disagree, thumb down. Okay, or you can have middle. Oh, Thomas, okay, there you go. Discuss, Barbara.
All right, here's my challenge for today, other than navigating flights. Here's challenge number 2. Maybe I can just come back to what I actually said, that good pedagogy doesn't easily scale. Now, you have to really think about how you're going to make it scale. And that's, I think, when I elaborated on the kind of ecosystem we're building with, maybe I didn't go into too much detail, given the time, but for example, in our ecosystem, we have online tutors who are subject matter tutors. We have on-site facilitators who help students onboard to the learning platform, who helps get students motivated, who are our bilingual people on the ground, but the online tutors are also bilingual. So there's a lot of what's going on in that ecosystem that will help us reach larger numbers. But in the end, deep learning, if that's what we're focusing on, and that's what we're focusing on deep learning. Deep learning does not necessarily scale easily. If you have, a cohort of 15, and then you look at a cohort of 100, I think it's going to be very difficult unless you really have a system, a modular system where you can redistribute them into smaller groups where that deep learning can happen. So yes, it can scale, but you need to, I'm responding to this from my vantage point working in refugee camps, low resource, and everything else. And I think that really helps us build up capacity. So you do need capacity for that. But it's not the same kind of learning, whether it's 100 or 1,000 or it's a cohort of 15, for the deep learning that we would like to happen.
Pierre?
Yeah, I do not totally disagree if you talk about MOOCs as videos. Quite often when you talk about MOOCs, people only see videos. And videos is a way to scale up easily the not so interesting pedagogical approach of lecturing. So if you say MOOCs are video lectures, then you would say, well, we have not scaled up something very rich. If you say, okay, what is interesting is to find two learners in my class with different opinions and to ask them to do something together, so there will be cognitive conflict, so argumentation, explanation, blah, blah, blah. Is that possible to scale out with 10,000 students? Yes, it is. It doesn't work very well now, but it's just an algorithm to find among 10,000 people, 5,000 pairs of people who disagree. That's just an algorithm to do. But my point is that the most interesting part of MOOCs is usually the one we never talk about. What do they do between videos? The forums, of course, but the assignments. Which kind of problem do you give to learners? And can you have a kind of open, complex problem? And that's what we do in all our MOOCs. In fluid dynamics, you have water tanks in the basement of EPFL, and you can actually, with a webcam, you can change the water tanks in the MOOCs on microcontrollers. You buy a toolkit for 20 francs, and you build a microcontroller. So the problem is when we talk about MOOCs, we always talk about video and never about the problem-solving activities we give them between videos. And this part is scalable. Now, if it's completely open problem, it takes people to follow, to tutor, and so on. In programming MOOCs, we have this fantastic automatic grader. So most of our programming MOOCs, you can have open problems with feedback, automatic grading of your assignments and feedback. So there, we can scale quite easily.
I saw another question. Oh.
I would also like to.
Yes, please add, and then someone throw a cue. Wait, could I see where the hand? There's this gentleman, and there's that gentleman. You roll the dice. You are in charge, Miguel. Okay.
Yeah, because it's so much connected to the learning experience, the experience we made as an organization. As some of you may know, we are only 2 years old, and as a startup, there's always this danger of wanting to scale as quick as possible, faster, bigger, higher. And we were very lucky that we knew where the break was at a very early beginning, and that we realized we have to follow evidence-based approaches, and we have to look at the technology at the same time at the science behind the technology and the learning that we want to facilitate. And I think what is even more important looking at our student cohorts is not only that you enable them to interact, and I think it was very nice, there was this metaphor of building things yesterday. This is key, really. And I think many MOOCs are not good enough in really enabling students to interact and build things. But also, and that connects to what the ladies there said before, is you need to provide different ways of interaction and collaboration. So MOOC size shows that for certain cohorts, student-teacher interaction is key. For others of our students, we saw that peer-to-peer collaboration is key. And we are also working on algorithms. It was very important for us that we also built our own system and it takes time. It's a never-ending process. You need to provide ways that ensure that the student interacts and collaborates with its peers and with its teachers in a way that it caters the needs of the student. And that is, I think there are many questions not yet answered by anyone in this room, but it's key that we work together, collaborate on trying to step by step incrementally answering these questions, and then we can scale. I'm convinced of that.
Great. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to take both, we're going to have each of you ask your questions and then have people answer. So you are first because you have the cube.
Yeah, just briefly, we just kind of skipped the question that was actually up there. And I think it's very important, and I'm kind of speaking on behalf of the student group that was here yesterday. So which digital competencies do or should be included in education, informal or formal, in the future, which are currently not taught widely, because we're actually working on that. And that would
So
be
you would
very...
like the answer to your exam? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, correct, yeah, that's always the best.
Okay, everyone remember that? Are you ready to answer? You may answer while he's throwing the, yeah, go ahead.
I think you need the same competencies like 40,000 years ago. You need communication, you need collaboration, you need critical thinking, and you need creativity. And it's the same things, but with new media, you have more importance in these competencies. And so I think this is a good signal, because all the competencies, we know a lot of things about these competencies, but we must understand what is new if we bring so a lot of digital media inside, but it's not so new.
And computational thinking skills, which is not programming, something much broader than programming.
That's what Han brought up yesterday. Would you like to add?
I think in our context, we came to the realization that we actually needed to take the lead from the refugees themselves. We came in, with a lot of assumptions about how to work in that space. And then we looked at, male and female learners in different cultures, different contexts. And the objective was really to get as many female learners on board, because not only does the donor require a certain percentage, but we really felt it was important to get a really good, almost equal representation, although that is almost impossible in those contexts, I sadly have to admit. But one of the ways in which we really took the lead was to figure out what works. And if they know how to use it, then let's not reinvent the wheel immediately. And that really, and ended up in, I don't know how many WhatsApp tutoring groups I have on my phone that I can follow no matter where I am, where I can, provide some immediate feedback, both to individuals and to groups. So we put people in groups, and I can give a group feedback, I can give individual feedback. Women can use it, everyone can use it. So that is our baseline. From there, we have a technology matrix that we've developed based on our research, and from there we begin to kind of get them onto what we would consider more demanding tools, or tools that require a bit more onboarding, where they have to learn how to use them. And in very little time, we're going to be rolling out a makerspace in Azraq camp, and that will really be a big challenge. I mean, I have to be trained myself first. But it really is going to show us whether indeed this onboarding in the technology realm is going to materialize, well, is going to lead to really enthusiastic and engaged secondary school students coming to the space and using the 3D scanner and 3D printer and doing all those things. I mean, there we do have some better connectivity, so that's why we can actually use it. But it would not have been my first choice.
Okay, the last audience question.
I listened yesterday and today again. We have this change from just listening and learning to making something. And I think this is maybe the essential point. When you actually start making something, then you have no problem of showing your qualification. It's in the GitHub or wherever. You make a film and you can show it. So this is your qualification. When you enable students and learners to become makers instead, and make this interactive so that they have to co-work and become good team players and bring this out into a certain public sphere for debate and feedback, then you have a learning system that is much more advanced and much more powerful, and you can apply it in a refugee camp as well as in a university. I think it's reshaping these models of making people really makers that's doing the job. And actually, we can use this model. We have it all in our pocket, power in your pocket.
Okay, I'm going to try to summarize this panel. And so I think the one thing to keep in mind is that this is informal to formal learning is a balance. We kept hearing that. So sometimes you're sort of vacillating between those extremes. Finding the right balance is critical. Being a quality assurance enthusiast is also essential, and while you're trying to figure out how to select the right kind of content. Additionally, we learned that either wine or external pressure will help you to reflect, and reflection is a really important component of informal learning. Having a space like an ePortfolio to be able to actually collect that knowledge and to share it with others is absolutely essential. And really, in the end, it's not that you can ever do this by yourself. I think one of the other key lessons was every single person up here talked about being part of an ecosystem, part of some sort of partnership. Informal learning is not something that is just done alone, whether that's the organization or the individual. It has to be done as part of an ecosystem. Thank you so much to this outstanding panel. Thank you all for participating.